From Prince George, British Columbia to Bristol, Connecticut, he has worked his way up the ladder in this competitive field. As a native Canadian, he was able to reach the pinnacle of his country's sports programming by working at TSN. He's covered a variety of major sporting events, including the FIFA World Cup, March Madness, and multiple Olympic Games. In this interview, you're going to learn how originally a criminology major ended up at the anchor desk for the worldwide leader in sports. Also, you're going to get tips on how to build out a 5-year career plan for yourself and what to do when the teleprompter goes out live on air. I'm Brad Dalius, and this is the second episode of the Shold Media Group podcast, where we're proud to present Nabil Karim. What are your thoughts on the current state of the sports broadcasting industry and where we're at right now as a society with it, with newer people obviously rising through the ranks and starting to put their imprint on things throughout the industry, and how you've seen it through your perspective? What are your current thoughts on where we're at right now and where we're heading?
Yeah, I think it's different for me because I'm coming from Canada, where I think the industry is a lot different. And so for me, being in the United States now, it's eye-opening in a sense. You know, I've always kept tabs on it, obviously, but living and breathing it now and kind of seeing the direction it's going, it's exciting. You're seeing a lot of different people moving up from a lot of different platforms. And, you know, as much as people say that the industry is shrinking, and I mean, it has changed from what it was, it's going in a different direction, right? Digital is huge now, and you're seeing a lot of new faces in that sense. And you're also seeing a lot of people who have traditionally been bigger names in the industry working on different platforms. Like, you wouldn't see a guy like Chris Berman before on maybe a digital platform, right? Whereas now he's on ESPN Plus doing primetime, which is just a great example of getting different people on different platforms, and people are consuming things in different ways. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's a great opportunity for younger people and even for established, you know, broadcasters in the industry to get jobs and to get different types of opportunities to, you know, get their message out there. So it was one of those things where, you know, I think a couple of years ago, people were, I think things are getting a little more bleak in the industry. And it was. I mean, it's sad to see when you see job losses and job cuts and that sort of thing. But at the same time, maybe there is a little more job creation happening from different avenues and different venues and platforms, which is a good thing for us, I think, all.
What's your earliest memory of sports, whether it's growing up in Canada, as you mentioned there, and we'll get into in just a bit. But if you can think back, your first memory of sports and maybe that first moment that you just kind of felt the excitement of the game, whether it's hockey, whether it's a different sport, whatever it may be. Did you have a moment like that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like growing up, I was a chubby kid. I say chubby, and I use that loosely because I was pretty big. I wasn't super active growing up. Then I really got into hockey, and I started to love. I'm from Vancouver, and of course, being Canadian, if you don't love hockey, you're not, you know, you don't get a Canadian passport. So, you know, I fell in love with the Vancouver Canucks, and that was my team. And there wasn't an exact moment where I think I fell in love with the sport, but I think through sport, you know, my lifestyle changed as a kid, and I became more active, and I just became so passionate about sports. So it was the Canucks that kind of really got me into it. And then the Vancouver Grizzlies came into town, and basketball is my favorite sport. I mean, even though I love hockey and being Canadian and so proud of, you know, what our teams have done, it's basketball for me. And when the Grizzlies came into town, that was a whole different love. And, you know, I played basketball throughout high school, and still to this day, the NBA is my favorite sport. So I would probably trace it back to those roots of hockey, you know, with the Canucks and the Grizzlies, and then kind of moving forward and just how it kind of shaped my lifestyle. You know, it really, again, became a passion of mine and something I always wanted to be involved in.
What was the perspective growing up, and maybe just hearing this from family or friends, and maybe this was a discussion if you grew up in more of a sports household? Did you grow up in more of a sports household? Did you have family members who were into sports? Was sports really on the minds a lot?
No, not really, to be honest. Man, my parents are from East Africa. They immigrated into Canada. You know, basically got kicked out of Africa actually in 1972. And, you know, my mom played some sports, but I wouldn't say that we came home and we all watched the game together. It wasn't actually until I got into sports, and my sister's a few years older than me, and she was kind of into it, but not really hardcore. But it wasn't until I really started, loving watching hockey and loving watching basketball and all these other sports that we kind of all congregated around and watched together. So we did eventually, but it wasn't like I grew up in a household that was like all about sports until I really kind of got everyone to rally around me.
Was there ever a perspective from just people you talked to growing up, or when you started to get more involved with sports and more of a fan of sports, that did people talk about in Canada? Did it ever come up in conversation, why are there professional sports teams in Canada? Why are there a couple when obviously these are, when you're talking about the 4 major sports leagues, they're based out of the United States. Why do they have some of their professional sports teams in Canada, whether it be with the Grizzlies when they were in Vancouver, or the hockey teams or the Raptors? You pick the sport for the most part. Was there ever discussion like that and a sense of, why have they decided to expand their leagues into Canada? Why haven't they done that to Mexico or, another surrounding country that makes sense?
There wasn't much discussion in Canada. I think in Canada, there's more of a sense of why don't we have more teams? I think we have the markets to sustain it, some of them anyways. Toronto, Vancouver. I think the Grizzlies leaving Vancouver was a huge blow to the city. And I think for people who didn't follow it closely, they thought Vancouver wasn't a basketball city. And that, I think, to this day still stings to a lot of people in Vancouver because they really supported that team. The ownership and that whole situation with the Grizzlies was a real tough one for the city. And I think Vancouver could definitely sustain a basketball team if the NBA ever came back. And in Toronto, they always talk about the NFL, right? If the NFL came to Toronto, and they did that whole series with the home and home thing with the Bills. But that wasn't real, right? Like there are a ton of people in Toronto who support the Bills and in Ontario, I shouldn't just say Toronto, but in Ontario, in the province. But that just didn't feel organic, right? And the Bills didn't want to be there. The players didn't want to be there. The fans can't show up the way they should have showed up. And it just didn't feel right. But I guarantee you, if there was a team in Toronto, it would sell out every game and it would be the hottest ticket in town. So I just feel like the conversation wasn't like, why are there teams in Canada? It's like, why aren't there more teams in Canada? Because we know we could support it and we have the fan bases to do it.
I want to go through the process of you growing up. We talked about becoming a sports fan, really getting your family into sports is what it sounds like and what you alluded to before. When did it become apparent to you that you wanted to work in sports in some capacity?
I'd probably say I'd go back to grade 10. And at that point, again, I'm super into basketball, playing on the team and everything's kind of revolving around that. And I got this sports reporter, his name's Farhan Lalji, and he had just joined TSN at that time. TSN, like ESPN Canada sort of thing. And so he had just joined TSN at the time. I got him to come speak to my class, and it was the coolest thing because we had to bring in somebody, and I brought in Farhan, who I thought would be really interesting, and he was great. And it was one of those things that really motivated me at the time. I'm like, wow, I really want to do what this guy's doing, right? Like, it's so great. He's going to games, he's reporting, he's doing this, doing that. And then from there, I started writing for like a school newsletter / paper, started doing more public speaking type of things at school. But it's funny though, because from there, I was really motivated, but at the same time discouraged because I didn't see many people look like me out there. And I also realized in talking to other people that it's a hard industry to get into, right? Because remember, at that time, there's no digital space or anything like that. It's just linear. And so it's discouraged in a way that, hey, it's going to be too hard to get into his. And again, I didn't know too many people who had gone through it. And so I went for a more traditional path rather than going into broadcasting until I changed when I went into university.
You went to college in Canada?
Yeah, I went to Simon Fraser University, and I was doing, my major was criminology, and my minor was communication. And it's funny because my sister is a criminal lawyer, and so I was kind of following her footsteps. And I enjoyed criminology. Like, I thought it was really interesting, but it was about, I'd say, like my second year where I wasn't feeling it. I knew there was something missing, and I still wanted to do this and try sports out. And this is like, 2 years removed from high school, right? And I was like, I got to try this, man. And so what I did was, without telling my parents or anybody, I just started reaching out to different people and just people who were successful in the industry in Canada and doing these like informational type interviews where I would just call them or email, whatever it was at the time, and just find out how they got to where they were and how they got to the position they were in, and kind of went through that. Then I searched schools and so forth. And I just kind of presented it to my parents, and I was like, listen, I'm going to finish university. I'm going to finish my degree. I'm going to switch it up to get a major in communication, but this is what I want to do. I want to get into broadcast journalism. And I kind of gave myself like a 5-year plan. In 5 years, from the research I had done, talking to all those people, 5 years, I could try to get into a major market in Canada. That would be successful for me. And if I didn't get into a major market in 5 years, then I'd go back. And because I'd have my degree behind me, I could go apply for law school and then go to plan B sort of thing. So at least I tried it and gave myself that chance, right? Because I didn't want to go back and think, at this age, at 36, and be like, oh man, I wish I'd tried that broadcasting thing. So that's what I kind of did. And I think at first for my parents, they were a little uneasy again, because in our community, and we have a lot of people who are in medicine or in law or in business and so forth and trade, but not a lot of people in broadcast journalism. It was just a different industry, completely foreign to them. And so they were concerned. And now I see it. I mean, at the time I didn't, but, being a father of two now, I kind of get it. And, you want to make sure your kids setting themselves up for the right stuff and the right future. And so they really noticed, though, that, I'd done my homework, and this is when they had questions, I had answers, and I kind of built a path for myself. And so they jumped on board, and then I had the support of my family, and it's kind of been great since, because, there's been a lot of ups, a lot of downs, but it's been quite the journey from Vancouver at that point.
You talk about having a 5-year plan to kind of lay out how you envision things going and mapping out, okay, I want to do X, Y, and Z in this certain amount of time. It doesn't always go perfectly like that. We all know that. That's life, but you have it organized in a sense. And I think it's really powerful, especially today, right? Because you have so many people who are looking for such just satisfaction and just instant gratification with so many different things, because technology has almost reprogrammed us to think that way here in 2020. If you could describe the importance of having a plan in place, it doesn't have to necessarily be 5 years, but just in something in general that people can map out for themselves if they're looking to get into this type of work, or just really anything in general that's just somewhat related to having professional success, because it takes more of a marathon approach versus a sprint.
100%. And I really believe in it. And at that time, there wasn't somebody who told me to write it down. It was just something where I was so passionate about doing this, and I wanted it to work so badly that I just put my thoughts down on paper. And again, I interviewed like 20 to 25 people, something in that range. And I kind of came up with the consensus of like, okay, if you really want to get on air quicker, you kind of move to a different market and smaller market, and you make your mistakes there and kind of whatever, so forth, and move up. But I think in any industry, it's really important to put it down and not just come up with goals, because we can all come up with goals, but write them down or put them down somewhere so you hold yourself accountable. I think that's the key, because when you can see, I'm a visual person in that sense. Like if I put things in my phone, I never check it because I can dismiss it really easily. So I still have like an old, like a daily planner type thing where I write things down because I need to scratch it off and cross it off and that sort of thing, just because I need to physically do that to know that I've completed the task. And for me, and it just sounds so corny, but this is so true, I wrote this thing down on a piece of paper and I left it in my wallet. And it used to sit in my wallet. And so my first job was in Prince George, BC. It's about a town of like 70,000 people. I was a news reporter there. It took me a long time to get my first job. Like other people in my class had taken other jobs, and I was hell bent on like getting an on-air job. Didn't matter if it was news or sports, but I knew I wanted to get an on-air job because that's where I could make those mistakes, get on air, get that experience, and then move up. And it took me a while to do that. And I remember in Prince George, and then my next job was in Winnipeg after that. But I remember always pulling that note out, and I pull it out on days where I just had honestly just shitty days. And so I would pull it out and say, okay, look, hey, refocus. This is what your plan is. And I don't remember all 5 steps anymore, but I do remember the 5th step being major market after 5 years. That was the motivation for me to say, hey, listen, there's a reason you're doing this. There's a reason you made these sacrifices to move away from your friends and your family, is because you have this dream of doing this thing that you love. And that was a great reminder. And I think if I just told myself, hey, these are my goals, it's a lot harder for me anyways to process it. But when I can see it physically, I think that is more powerful. And that's something I got to do again. And it's an exercise I've done over and over as I've taken the next step. And it's something I'm in the process of doing right now while I'm at ESPN.
When you were at TSN in Canada before you came over to ESPN, which we'll get into in just a little bit, was there an event that, just a sports event that you covered that stood out to you maybe above all, that it was just one of those reminders that this is why I do what I do. This is the type of event that we work so hard for on the daily, regular basis to try and get up to, whether it's, I know you covered the Olympics a couple of times in Sochi and in Rio, you covered March Madness, but was there a specific event out of those or others that stood out to you during your time at TSN?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky to have covered so many international events, which is, I mean, it's just mind-boggling when you're at the event itself. The Olympics, for that, I was actually in Toronto, hosting from Toronto, so I didn't get to experience the Olympics in that sense. But for me, I think it would have to be doing the Euros in 2012. That was in Poland, Ukraine, and also going to Brazil for the FIFA World Cup. And I think that's just such a global event. I mean, I think it's bigger than the Olympics, or right up there, 1, 2. But just how vast that tournament is, how big it is, and how much it means to people. And when you're on the scene, and for example, for the Euros, we were there for 33 days or something it was, and we hit 24 flights within our 33. It was poor planning, I'll put it on that. I'll put it that way. But we're flying within these cities back and forth, and within the countries back and forth. But at the same time, we got to experience so much culture. We got to meet a lot of different people, and we got to go to these games. And you go to these games, and I'll give an example. So the opening match was in Poland, and my producer who came with me was Polish. And so it was great because, you know, he got a chance to go back home and see these things that he hasn't seen in some odd years. And the narrative around that was that Poland could never host an international event like this. And so this was a big deal for his country. And we get into that opening match, and I believe it was Poland and Greece. And we're standing there, and we're in the crowd, and we have the national anthem going. And I look over, and people are crying. Like, there's so many people crying. And again, it was just a big moment for the country because nobody thought they could do this. And then I look over at my producer, and he's bawling, which I did not expect. Again, he's lived in Canada for so many years.
Yeah.
But the emotion that overcame it was just one of those powerful moments where it's like, wow, this like sport does so much and is so powerful. And that was one of those cool like times where you're just like, man, I'm lucky to be here. I'm lucky to do what I get to do. You know, being in Brazil for the World Cup, unforgettable, just unforgettable. And just seeing the world come together. I always tell people, like, if you got one sporting event that you can go to, make it a World Cup or a Euro or some kind of international soccer event, because you don't really even need to be a fan of the game. You don't need to be a fan of a certain team. You just put on a certain color, a certain jersey, a kit, whatever you want to call it, and just join the experience, because that's what it is. It's an experience. And so I look back at that, and I just think it's something that is just unforgettable, and something hopefully I can take my family to and my wife to, you know, my kids down the line.
Fast forward to May of 2019. You're hired at ESPN. You come on as an anchor for SportsCenter. How did that come about, if you could bridge the gap between TSN and then when you're hired at ESPN, the process and how you ultimately came to one of the leading networks for sports? So
the process took about a year. I had actually auditioned for ESPN just over a year before that. I would say some timeline in that sense, where it was just over a year before. And I got an agent. You know, I knew I wanted to do more, and I knew I wanted more opportunity, and I felt like I could do more, and I just wasn't getting that at TSN. And so, you know, I got an agent, and that's so key. Finding somebody who actually believes in you. And I'm really lucky to have Kevin Belby and Gideon Cohen. And so these guys, you know, they put me in front of different people, and they kind of passed my work along to the contacts at ESPN, and they didn't have a job at the time. They were really clear about it. They were like, listen, we have no no inclination of hiring anybody right now, but we do find you interesting and we like your work and we want to see what you look like on our set. And so I came down and went for the audition, and it was one of those moments, I'm not going to lie. I took a picture in front of the ESPN sign. That's kind of that post I have, I announced I was going to ESPN. That was from a year and a bit ago. And I took a picture there because I wanted to show my kids one day, hey, I actually, came to ESPN and I had this audition, because you don't know if you're going to get the job, right? And it was just one of those things where it was a meet and greet, met a whole bunch of different people. And, you think things went well and it seemed like it went well, but you never know. And then from there, we kept in touch, went back and forth, and I sent them some more work as they asked for. And, when something finally did come up, that's when it kind of became a little more serious. And, it took about a couple months there and before May to kind of finalize everything. But again, it's a long-winded answer, but basically it took about just over a year to get it done. But it started with me just coming to audition without a job in mind. And it was one of those things where the guys at ESPN, Rob Savinelli and the crew there, had enough faith in me, thinking, you know what, this guy can fit in and we could use him in different spots. And, I'm lucky to have that.
How long was the actual audition, or what did they have you do, in a sense of just reading stuff off a prompter? If you could take us into the intricacies a little bit of how that worked.
The audition was actually short. It was, I think we did like 2 blocks. It might have been, 15 minutes. I did it with another anchor there who was doing updates at that time. And yeah, it was pretty short. And like, it was one of those things where like you have auditions for other places. And I think this is something, when you go to a small market, you can just send your demo tape, right? And they'll just hire you off your demo tape. And then when you get to and this is how it is in Canada anyway, I'm not sure about the United States, but in Canada, when you go to a medium-sized market or a small market, you send your demo tape, you're likely going to get hired off that tape. But when you come to a big market like Toronto, and I'm assuming here in the States too, whenever you come to a big market, they're going to want to see you, see how you react. And I remember at TSN, when I went for my audition there, they would throw you off, like, the prompter would go out. Supposedly, they got to throw you for a little loop. And it's good because they want to see how you react, right?
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to react to any kind of mistakes or any kind of things that, may go wrong.
Does that happen more often than people would think in real time?
Dude, I am telling you, it happens a lot more than you would think. And, hopefully you're good enough and smooth enough. And sometimes, you know what, man, it's way out of your control. And the best advice I ever got, and I think the best way to go about it is just have fun with it sometimes. I mean, like, hey, mistakes, it's live TV. Like, things are going to happen. Like, whether you mess up, somebody else messes up, something goes wrong behind the scenes, things are going to happen. It's live TV. Because so many hours of it. I actually progressed in my career when I finally just gave up on being so hard on myself. And sometimes, again, mistakes will happen because it's your fault. Somebody else. We're all a team anyway. But at the end of the day, the viewer sees you and they think you made that mistake. And I always put that pressure on myself. And then at the end of the day, I was like, man, forget it. Like, I got some great advice. Just like, dude, we do so much live TV. That small segment, first of all, might not be as bad as what you thought. And B, we're human, man. Like, you just play it off and we move on. And I got that advice 2 or 3 years ago. And honestly, from there, I've been so much better. Cause it's not like I don't care. I just don't stress about, the little mistakes here or there. But, sorry, getting back to your question, I think I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but, yeah, it does happen more than you would think. Definitely. Like, and that's when you really see like the professionalism too of like the best of the best when you work with these anchors and how they can just switch, or they can just, because they're prepared and they know so much, that they're able to make it look so smooth. And then there's sometimes it's just unavoidable and you just have to have some fun with it, because otherwise you're just scrambling and you just feel like an idiot. But, sometimes you have fun with it and you're transparent with your audience. I think that's so huge, being transparent with the audience that, hey, I don't really know what's going on here right now. This is completely the wrong video to the tape here that we got, to the script that I got here. But let's have some fun with it and let's just go through it, and it's live TV. And sometimes that actually works well and people have fun with it too.
Was there a moment during your audition at ESPN or something maybe recently that came up when you were on the air that it was one of those times that you thought back to something that had happened in the past, whether it's something that you learned through instruction at university or when you were in Canada working one of your jobs earlier in your career, that you were happy that you experienced it, or maybe it was a piece of advice from someone that really helped you in the moment, more in the present, to get through whatever challenge or obstacle you had to kind of get through there at the moment?
I think it's kind of like a culmination of everything, right? Like I was really lucky at TSN to have done so many different events. I hosted a lot, which is what I love to do. I love hosting panels and doing live events, and got to do a lot of Sports Center. I did some reporting. So it's all kind of a culmination of everything, the experiences that you get. So without my experiences there's no way I'd be here today. And so I don't think there's like a one pinpoint moment where I'm like, oh, okay, thankfully I did that before. It's just one of those things. I think as you gain experience, you become more comfortable. I think the best advice I ever got is just be yourself. And I know everybody gets that same piece of advice like all the time. I see it all the time, but it really is the best piece of advice you can get, because even when I got to ESPN, I'll give you an example. For the first 3 weeks, I was just kind of job shadowing people and seeing different departments of what they do here, because the resources are just incredible at ESPN compared to, anywhere else in the world. So it's not really fair to compare it to anybody. But it was a nice ease-in process of like, okay, this is what we do. This is how we do this. This is how we do that. Anyways, in the process of shadowing, I sat down with guys like SVP and different anchors, and SVP gave me some great advice. And he was just like, listen, man, he's like, do what you do. He goes, you're here for a reason. There's a reason you're on this roster. While you're on this team, you're one of us now. Just be yourself. Don't change. There's a reason you're kind of thing. That's kind of what he said. And that kind of just put me at ease, because, again, it's kind of the fear of the unknown coming from Canada, going to the United States, and everything's different, and ESPN, and the whole thing. But I think since I got here, I've kind of been pretty calm for the most part, and it's been comfortable. The environment around me has been really good, but just trying to be myself has been the best piece of advice that, I could give anybody. And the best thing that I've taken from my past experiences is just being myself and being comfortable, and not trying to be like any of the other anchors here, because that I know I would have failed right off the top. And I think so far things have gone really well. And that's just because I've been the same guy that I was at TSN.
Who is someone at ESPN, whether it's an on-air personality or maybe someone behind the scenes, that likes to keep everything light, is somewhat of, just the true optimist in the room, sort of say, and maybe just has good advice across the board? Have you run into someone like that just maybe stands out amongst the whole group there?
There's so many people. There's so many people here that are characters and just funny and energetic. And for me, like, I don't work with just one person or one crew. Like, I've been all over the map since I've been here. I was doing the morning show to start, and then I did, some daytime stuff, the noon show. And I did, I basically done every sports center there is. So I've kind of been all over the place. I've kind of gotten little tidbits from different people. And you look at someone like Elle Duncan's hilarious. She's been really great to me. Great advice, but she's funny. And then there's, people like Kevin DeGund. He was, big personality. He was one of the first guys to kind of pull me aside and give me some advice. And he's just been a great friend. And then, at night, like Michael, he's hilarious. Me and Michael, we talk about the show Power all the time. That's what we do in during breaks. We're like ripping on the show Power. We love it. But then this last season is kind of killing us. So, there's just different people with different interests. And that's what I love about, everyone just has embraced you. And the thing is, you may not have so many common interests with every single person here, but you will find them because, again, people are so great. And especially when you're on air, I think the on-air chemistry is really important. And that's never an issue here. And for me, being the new guy, it'd be easy for there to be some kind of awkward chemistry, but these guys are so good. They're so good, and they'll find something that they'll find their style, your style, what kind of mixes. And so in that sense, I'm still learning a lot of the personalities, but there's always somebody on every shift that's kind of like, going off on something. And there's always some kind of sports rant in the newsroom and the screening where we kind of all sit. It's always loud, man. So that's kind of the fun part of it. There's so much energy and so much enthusiasm, but for me to pick out one person, it's kind of hard, just because I don't usually hang with just like one crew. Do you ever catch yourself on TV when you're at home with the family or friends, and maybe it's not expected, but you had done a pre-recorded segment, let's say at ESPN, and then you come home? Do you ever catch yourself on TV? Has that ever happened? Yeah, that's happened before. It happened once when we were at a restaurant. It was years ago when I was at TSN, and I had taped something earlier in the day, and they played it again later on at night. And we were with these friends that we actually had just met. And so this was just a couple friends that we had me and my wife and this other couple, and we went out and we're just hanging out and just kind of getting to know these people. And all of a sudden you see me on TV and they're like, well, wait, what? You're on TV?
Right.
And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't tell you, but I work for TSN. But no, like, you know, the fun stuff is when like my son watches me on TV, and he rarely does, but when he does, it's like, hey, Dad. And then he'll tell me now, he's like, yeah, I saw you on TV. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, you were smiling at me, Dad. I'm like, yeah, buddy, I was smiling at you. So, you know, that's kind of the cool stuff when your kids see you and they get excited. You know, friends and people will message you and chirp you all the time. But it's more when you're with, like there might be the opportunity or the seldom opportunity where, you know, you are home with your kid or something, and then he gets to see you and kind of understands what you do. You've been telling me recently, Dad, when you're done at ESPN, I want to work there too. I'm like, all right, buddy, we'll talk about that later. So, you know, it's kind of neat in that sense. I think mostly for kids, it's kind of cool.
Is there someone you'd like to work with, whether it's a possible colleague who works in the industry of sports and journalism, or maybe it's someone you'd like to interview throughout the sports world? Who is someone you most like to work with at some point who maybe you haven't had a chance yet to interact with?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, off the top of my head, if you're going to talk colleague, I'd say Randy Moss. And for the people who know me around ESPN now, they all say, hey, who's your team? And I go, listen, I don't really have a team growing up, but I had a player. That was Randy Moss. So wherever Randy played, that was my team. Just because I was in love with that guy as far as his game. He was just so exciting to watch. And I mean, I don't really have to rip off all the stuff Randy did just because we all know how good he was and, you know, one of the GOATs. And to see him on TV now, you know, I still remember he was at Fox Sports, and he started at Fox Sports. And Jay and Dan, who are two Canadians that came from TSN, they went to Fox Sports and FS1. They were working with Randy, I think, when he first started. And I remember texting Jay, like, yo, that's so cool. Randy Moss. He's like, yeah, Randy's really nice. And it was just one of those things that for me, just because he meant a lot to me growing up, I don't usually get too like starstruck by people. You know, it's very rare that kind of happens to me. But just because when you're around these athletes all the time, you know, when you're in locker rooms and so forth, you kind of it loses that lure, right? But a guy like Randy would be kind of cool, and I'd probably geek out. I'm not going to lie, I'd probably geek out. So you'll probably see a post. When I do actually work with Randy Moss, you will definitely see a post, because that would be a cool one for me, and one of those things where I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool today. Coming to work today, that's one of those moments where, like, this is a cool job.
Something that you'd like to see changed in the sports world, whether it's with team sports or an individual sport, just something that maybe just more so just thinking this as a fan that you'd like to see maybe switched up a bit.
As a fan, man, the rule changes right now. The NFL's got to figure something out here. I mean, it's getting so difficult to keep up with what is going on and what is a catch and what isn't. It's just getting ridiculous that I think for, you know, the fair weather fan or for, you know, even like the hardcore fan, it's frustrating when you're watching a game and this is the narrative that we have week after week. We did a ton of NFL shows this year, right? On Sundays, I would do Sports Center once in a while with Michael or Zubin, and, you know, Ryan Clark's there and Tim Hasselback, and we're having the same conversation every week. Like, what's a catch? What isn't a catch? And if these guys don't know, and sometimes they're like, I don't even know, then there's a problem, right? So I think that from a fan's perspective has to change. I don't know what they need to do. I don't have the solution myself, but I think that's a frustrating thing, especially for the NFL, because it's such a great sport, you know, the number one sport out there. For that narrative to be pretty constant week after week, I think it's pretty frustrating.
Do you have a favorite emoji?
Not gonna lie, I use emojis a lot. This is my emoji game. I do a lot of the laughing, you know, like the cry laughs. Yeah. You know, something super funny. I use that a lot, but I use that generically a lot to people. Like, if I don't really want to get into a conversation with somebody that much, I don't want to get too deep into it, I'm going to give you one of those, and hopefully that'll kind of end the conversation. You kind of realize that, hey, it's not, you know, we don't need to go back and forth too much. But my favorite I like you know which I actually like a lot? I like the blown up head. Oh, yeah. You know, like, wow, mind blown. It's like mind blown or something. Yes. I'm digging that one. I'm digging that one right now. I use that one every so often, and I think that's pretty effective. So I'm going to go with that one right now, I think.
As we enter a new decade now in the 2020s and talking about this industry, Nabil, of sports journalism and where we came from in the last decade to maybe where we're all headed in this new one, what's something that you can foresee that prospective and, as we talked about earlier, people rising through the ranks throughout this industry are probably going to need at their disposal as a tool, as a skill of theirs to be able to succeed and possibly thrive in what's to come here in this new decade of just the sports journalism, sports broadcasting industry as a whole?
I think like there's not just one thing. I think being versatile is going to be the key. Like I always say that. And I say that to people who reach out to me all the time. I'm like, hey man, you got to be versatile. Like you got to be able to, and back in the day when I first started, I was telling people that. And when I was learning that and getting that same advice, it was like being able to shoot, being able to report, being able to be on camera. But that's totally changed now, because at that time it's being able to write. Like you don't really, I mean, now it's changed to a fact that like, you got to be able to podcast. You got to be able to blog, and blog's probably not the right one, but you know what I mean? Like to definitely write to a certain degree, depending on what you're writing for. But, you know, being able to work the digital space, right? Like if you're versatile and you can go on different platforms, like look at just some of the people at ESPN, like some of the risers at ESPN, they're all over the place. They're not just on linear TV, you know, Cassie Hubbard's a great example on Hoop Streams, and she's on TV and she's doing this. She's hosting, you know, college football at times. And so you got to be able to do different things in the industry and really spread it out, really spread out your skill base. And I think that's going to be really important, because the digital space is only going to get bigger. Right. And so I think being able to be versatile on a number of platforms is going to be really, really important. Social media, and listen, man, I'm not good at social media, but social media is super important for us now too. So, and it's not just now, it has been. And that's why, you know, I'm kind of behind the curve on that. But I think, again, just being versatile within the space and being able to do, basically you just want, a boss says, hey man, I don't have that opening, but I have an opening for this instead. And it's something different, but it's within your skill set. Yeah, I can do it. Yeah, I can do that. I can definitely do that. Because the thing I'm learning too, especially in our space, is that, hey, you can do something in the digital space, be really good at it, and somebody else sees you and they're like, hey man, I really like what you did over there. What if I get you to do it over here on a different platform? So I think just being able to show that skill set is really, really important. I don't know if there's one specific thing that you should be good at or you'll need to be good at, but I think if you can be well-rounded, you're probably giving yourself a really good chance at being employable.
Since our conversation, Nabil's been named co-anchor of ESPN's new daily essentials show, The Replay. This has been our second episode of the Shold Media Group podcast, where we spotlight the lives and careers of some of the hardest working broadcasters and journalists in the world of sports. You can subscribe to Shold Media Group on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like what you've heard, we would love it if you gave us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe. I'm your host, Brad Dalius. Special thanks to Nabil Karim for this interview and Taylor Shold of the Shold Media Group. This podcast was created by Dalius Media Productions. Keep living the dream.